The camping trip had been Reeve's idea, which surprised no one who knew Reeve. Reeve Solomon was 34, a landscape architect with sun-darkened forearms and the particular confidence of someone who has spent enough time outdoors to stop being intimidated by it. He'd been camping at Lake Hardin since childhood. His grandfather had owned a small fishing cabin on the eastern shore, and even after the property passed out of the family, Reeve kept returning to the lake the way some people keep returning to childhood homes, out of loyalty or habit, or the particular comfort of a place that held memories of who you used to be. He'd proposed the trip at Delia Marsh's birthday dinner in July. 5 of us around a restaurant table, deep into a second bottle of wine, talking about how we never did anything anymore, how the years were composting into identical routines, and we needed something to break the pattern. 3 days. A site Reeve knew on the lake's north shore. No electricity, no signal, and he'd said this with the particular emphasis of someone who has thought it. Through no obligations. It had seemed straightforward at a table in July. By August, with the trip to days out and the weather forecast showing a heat index of 94, it seemed considerably less romantic. But we all went. Because that's what you do when you're 30-something and you've promised yourself. No. You'll stop letting logistics win. There was Reeve. Who drove the first truck and handled logistics with cheerful competence? There was his girlfriend of 2 years, Mara Tate, 29. A sous chef with short natural hair and an opinion about everything, which was one of the things we all loved about her. There was Daniel Park, 32, a quiet, meticulous software developer who was Reeve's college roommate and the group's unofficial historian. He remembered everything, every detail of every shared experience, and could be counted on to produce the exact right memory at the exact right moment. There was Simone Billiard, 31, a nurse practitioner, with a dry sense of humor and the unflappable calm of someone who had seen enough genuine emergencies to calibrate her alarm response accurately. And there was me, Joe, the biology teacher, the one who needed more than any of the others but less than she'd ever admitted, to be somewhere that wasn't her classroom or her apartment or the inside of her own head, which had been an increasingly uncomfortable place to live since a certain conversation with her department head in June that had triggered a slow-rolling professional crisis that she was handling. Thank you very much, by not thinking about it. We arrived at the Lake Hardin North Shore access point on a Thursday afternoon in the heavy gold light of late summer. The campsite Reeve had chosen was a 10-minute walk from the parking area, down a needle-carpeted path through a mixed pine and oak forest, opening onto a flat sandy clearing that met the lake at a gentle slope. The water was dark and still and reflected the sky with mirror precision. A fire ring of stacked limestone sat center camp, ringed by a half-circle of log seating. It's perfect, Mara said, setting her pack down and looking at the lake with her hands on her hips. Annoying, but perfect. Why annoying? Daniel asked. Because I've been complaining about this trip for 3 weeks and now I have to stop. Laughter. The specific warm laughter of people who know each other well enough to mean it. We set up camp in the early evening, working with the comfortable efficiency of people who've done things together long enough to know each other's patterns. Reeve and Daniel handled the tents. 2 3-person tents set back from the fire ring at opposite ends of the clearing. Mara, who did not trust anyone else's food preparation, organized the cooler with a territorial focus that we'd learned not to interfere with. Simone and I gathered firewood from the forest edge, working in companionable silence that was punctuated occasionally by Simone, making remarks about the particular properties of different wood types for burning, which was the kind of information she'd accumulated over a lifetime of camping and deployed with the casual authority of someone who simply knew things. The first fire went up at 7:30, and we ate at 8, Mara's camp cooking, which was embarrassingly good. A cast-iron skillet situation involving sausage and onions and peppers, that she'd done a significant amount of prep work for at home and was nonchalant about in a way that made it clear she was pleased with our admiration. We ate and talked, and the fire burned, and the lake was still and dark beyond its light, and the forest was loud with the full orchestral production of a Tennessee August night, crickets, tree frogs, the occasional woodpecker adjusting its schedule, the the drip and trickle of the water's edge, nighthawks calling overhead. The world performing itself for anyone who cared to listen. "Do you hear that?" Simone said, at some point after our second round of drinks. "The frogs," I said. "All of it. The whole, everything." She gestured vaguely at the dark around us. When was the last time any of us actually listened to the dark? None of us had an answer for that. We sat with it for a while, listening, and it was good. It was genuinely, honestly good. That was the first night. Nothing happened on the first night. Thursday passed in the easy, unhurried way of days without obligations. We swam in the morning. The lake was cold and clear once you got past the first muddy shelf. And Daniel, who swam with powerful economical strokes, went out farther than any of us and came back describing fish he'd seen at depth with the enthusiasm of someone encountering unexpected grace. Mara refused to go past her waist on the grounds that she knew what lived in lakes and had made an informed decision, which Reeve found endlessly funny. We hiked the forest trail on the North Ridge in the afternoon, a 4-mile loop that Reeve navigated from memory. The trail wound through old-growth sections, where the trees were enormous and the light came down in green-filtered. Columns and everything smelled of pine, resin, and slow time. I kept stopping to look at things: bark patterns, fungi formations, the intricate engineering of a spider's web strung between 2 rhododendron branches, which is what I do, professionally and temperamentally. I am a person who looks closely at living systems. It was on this hike about 2 miles in that Reeve stopped and crouched at the edge of the trail. "Come look at this," he said. We gathered around him. He was looking at a section of bare soil between 2 exposed tree roots where something had been recently. Disturbed, the ground freshly turned. Leaves displaced, the edges of the disturbance still distinct enough to suggest it had happened within the last day or 2. Daniel offered. "Maybe," Reeve said. He was frowning at it. "But look at the pattern." He traced the outline with one finger without touching it. "It's not random. It goes in it's like a line. A deliberate line." He was right. The disturbance wasn't circular the way animal digging tends to be. It ran in a shallow trench, maybe 8 feet long, precisely where the tree roots created a natural boundary on both sides. "Someone digging a drainage channel?" Simone suggested. "Maintenance trail work?" I said. "There's no maintenance crew for this section," Reeve said. "This is backcountry. No managed access." We looked at it for a while and arrived at no conclusion that satisfied everyone, which is often how things go. Mara took a photo. We kept hiking. But Reeve was quieter for the rest of the afternoon. I noticed it and filed it away. At dinner, another Mara production. This time, a foil packet situation with fish Daniel had caught from the dock in the late afternoon. Looking enormously pleased with himself, Reeve brought it up again. Said he'd been thinking about it on the trail. Said there were 2 more places on the way back he'd noticed but hadn't mentioned. Small disturbances. Similar in shape and placement, always along the tree line. Always following the natural boundary between the forest and the clearer ground. Like something marking a perimeter, Daniel said. The words sat in the warm air between us. "Surveying," Simone said practically. "Surveyors do odd things to the landscape. Could be Park Service marking for a future project?" "In August?" Reeve said. "They mark in spring for summer projects." "Wildlife researchers," I offered. "Tracking routes, establishing observation boundaries." "Sure," Reeve said. He looked at the fire. "Sure, probably." But he added wood to the fire before we turned in, more than we needed, building it up higher and hotter than usual. And when we settled into the rhythm of the second night, the same orchestra of frogs and crickets and nighthawks. The same warm, dark, and lake smell and firelight. I noticed he sat with his back to the fire and his face to the tree line. For a long while before he spoke again, he didn't say what he was thinking. I didn't ask. The second night passed without incident. But the quality of Reeve's silence and the size of the fire he'd built, and the way he'd arranged himself to watch the tree line, I couldn't stop cataloging these details. The way I catalog things when my nervous system has decided something is data. Saturday was the last full day. We'd leave Sunday morning, And there was a collective, unspoken agreement to make the day count, to be present in the specific way that last days in good places demand. We slept late, had a slow breakfast, swam again. Daniel finished the novel he'd brought and read aloud to us from the final chapter while we lay in the afternoon shade, which was exactly the kind of absurd, lovely thing that only happens when you have nowhere to be. Simona and I took a kayak out on the lake in the late afternoon. When the light turned horizontal and the water went from dark green to hammered copper, we paddled without particular direction, letting the kayak drift in the warm breeze, and talked about the things we didn't usually have time or stillness to talk about: her relationship, which was complicated in ways she was honest about; my professional crisis, which I was less honest about but which surfaced anyway; the way submerged things do when you're relaxed enough to stop holding them down. "You're afraid you've been teaching the wrong things," Simone said. It wasn't a question. "I've been teaching the curriculum," I said. "That's not what I asked." I watched a great blue heron lift from the far shore with the slow dignity of something that had never needed to hurry. "I've been teaching the facts," I said. "The taxonomy, the cycles, the measurable processes, and I've been doing it well, I think. But I've been efficient. Covering material, and the thing my department head said in June," I stopped.
"Ow, what did she say?"
"She said one of my students had told her that I made biology feel like math, like it was just numbers with Latin names." I paused. She wasn't wrong. That's what I've been doing, taking the living world and flattening it into data. Simone let the kayak drift. The heron was gone, the far shore empty and still. "You know what the problem is?" she said. "You know, it's not about the curriculum. It's about wonder," I said. I hated the word as I said it, the slightly embarrassing softness of it. "You can't teach wonder from a worksheet." "No," she said. "You can't." We paddled back in comfortable silence. And the water was copper and the sky above. It was turning violet, and the forest on the shore was going dark in the early evening, and everything was honest and good. The third campfire went up at 7. Bigger than the previous nights, not because Reeve was nervous this time, but because it was the last night and we wanted the warmth. We'd used up most of the gathered wood, and Reeve and Daniel made one last run to the forest edge for the remaining dry branches while Mara and Simone and I organized the last of the food into a final dinner worthy of the occasion. We ate at 8:30. We talked until nearly 11. The conversation had the specific quality of conversations that happen on last nights in good places, ranging and honest and occasionally profound in the way that ordinary people become profound when they've spent 3 days outside the noise of their ordinary lives. The fire had been burning for 4 hours when it went out, not dying down, not burning low. Out. One moment. Firelight. Warmth. 5 faces in the orange glow. Mara mid-sentence about something she'd been meaning to say for months. Next moment, complete darkness. Not the gradual dimming of a fire burning to coals. An instant extinction, as if an enormous, invisible hand had simply closed over the flames and smothered them. We all registered it at the same instant. 5 people going simultaneously silent, the conversation cut clean by the sudden dark. What just Mara started, and then the sound stopped. All of it, everything. The crickets, the frogs, the nighthawks, the small movements of the lake at the shore, the wind in the trees, the breathing of the forest, everything at once, absolutely silent. I have a scientific mind. My first instinct is always to categorize, to find the known framework that accommodates the observation. And I sat in that instant of total darkness and total silence and reached for the framework. Reached for the explanation: mass startle response in local fauna. Unusual atmospheric pressure event, collective sensory misperception. I found nothing. There was no framework. The silence was total and real, and it had happened at the same instant. The fire went out, and it was not a coincidence. "Nobody move," Reeve said. His voice was very quiet. "Nobody speak. Just listen." So we listened, and in the silence in that vast smothering, absolute quiet, we heard something. Coming from the tree line, toward us. It is difficult to describe what we heard, because what we heard was, by any standard definition, almost nothing. It was not a roar or a shriek, or the kind of dramatic sound that horror would have you expect from a darkness like that one. It was far subtler than that, and far more effective. It was a tone, a single sustained frequency, very low. Below the range where sound becomes comfortably identifiable as sound, and enters the territory where you feel it more than hear it. A vibration at the lower threshold of auditory perception, the register where your chest cavity resonates before your conscious mind registers the source, where your body understands something before your brain has processed it. It was coming from the tree line. From the direction of the forest's edge, where the cleared campground ended and the old pines began, and it was moving slowly, steadily, laterally along that border, as though something was tracing the perimeter of the camp, tracing it deliberately in my mind. Unwanted and immediate, I saw the disturbed ground Reeve had found on the trail, the shallow trench running in a line, the perimeter markings. "It's been here before," I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, a near whisper. "What?" Mara said. "The markings Reeve found. They weren't survey work. They weren't drainage." I was speaking in the controlled way I speak when I'm afraid and need to use language as anchor. They were a boundary map. Something had walked that perimeter before. Something had mapped this campsite. A long silence. Around us, the absolute quiet continued. No cricket, no frog, no wind. "That's not possible," Daniel said. It wasn't a protest. It was the rational mind doing its job, holding the line. "I know," I said. "Tell that to the frogs." The tone continued. Moving, slow and patient and methodical. Reeve had his hand on the flashlight, at his belt, but he hadn't turned it on. I understood why without asking. On a level deeper than thought, turning on a light felt like an announcement, like raising a hand. "Does anyone else feel that?" Simone asked. Her voice was professional. Measured the tone she used in clinical situations when she needed to assess without projecting alarm. "Not here, feel." "Yes, all of us." In the chest cavity, in the sternum. The resonance of the frequency at a depth that bypassed the ears and addressed the body directly. "Ow." "Infrasound," I said. And then immediately, "But that doesn't explain, no," Simone agreed. "It doesn't explain the frogs." Infrasound frequencies below 20 Hz is a documented phenomenon in nature. Elephants use it for long-distance communication. Certain geological events produce it. Some research suggests specific infrasound frequencies can induce feelings of unease, dread, or the sensation of a presence in humans. It was a known thing, a measurable thing. But infrasound does not make every cricket in a quarter-mile radius go silent simultaneously. It does not extinguish a healthy campfire in an instant. These things do not share a scientific framework with infrasound. These things do not share a scientific framework with anything I knew. The tone reached the far side of the camp. Paused, I was certain of a pause, a definite cessation of movement, and then began its return arc. "Completing the circuit. It's circling us," Daniel said. "Yes," Reeve said. "What do we do?" Nobody answered because nobody knew. We sat in the dark for what I estimated was 40 minutes. I know this because I was tracking time deliberately, counting breaths. Doing the thing I do when I need to stay anchored, imposing measurable structure on unmeasurable experience. The tone continued its slow circuit. It completed 3 full rotations around the camp. I tracked it by the direction of that felt resonance. The way your body orients toward a sound, even when your mind isn't certain it's hearing one. 3 complete loops, slow and methodical, with the same brief pause at each cardinal point. Then, on the 4th approach from the north, from the direction of the deep old-growth forest where we'd hiked and found the markings, the tone changed. It deepened, dropped below the threshold where I could feel it in my chest, into the threshold where I could feel it in my teeth, in the base of my skull, a frequency that felt less like sound and more like pressure. Like the air itself was thickening. Mara, made a small involuntary sound beside me. I reached out and found her hand in the dark without thinking about it, and she gripped back hard. "Reeve," Simone said. Her clinical calm was holding, but just barely. I could hear the effort in it. "Tell us about this lake. Tell us what you actually know." A pause. In the dark, I could feel Reeve's hesitation. "My grandfather told me things," he said finally. "I didn't take them seriously." "I never did. Tell us now," she said. Reeve stopped. Started again. He spent 30 summers here. He knew this area better than most people know their own neighborhoods. And he said the North Shore specifically, this section had a quality he called the patience. That's what he called it. The patience. A pause. He said the forest on the North Shore was older than any other section of the lake. Old enough that the things living in it had developed a relationship with time that didn't match human time. That they moved on longer rhythms. And that, on certain nights, he said August nights specifically, he was always specific about. August, the relationship between the forest and the campground became active. "Active," Daniel repeated. He said something, in the old forest comes to the boundary in August. It doesn't cross. It never crosses. But it comes to the edge, and it assesses, decides whether the people at the camp belong there. Whether their Reeve paused. He used the word worthy. I thought it was poetic. Old man talking about the forest's judgment. The tone pulsed once, deep and felt rather than heard. "And what happens?" Mara asked. "If it decides you're not worthy?" Her voice was very careful. He never said. He said it had never made that determination. In 30 summers, he said he'd felt the patience every August, and every August it passed. A pause. But he also said that the year his brother came, his younger brother, a man my grandfather described as fundamentally dishonest, the patience lasted longer. Much longer. Hours. "What does dishonest mean in this context?" I asked. "Dishonest about what?" "Dishonest about himself," I think Reeve said. His brother was a man who performed his life rather than living it, who maintained such a careful construction of who he was for the benefit of other people that somewhere under it all, the actual person had gone thin. A long pause. My grandfather said the patients could feel that, could feel the gap between what a person presented and what they actually were. And it didn't like the gap. The silence around that was comprehensive, because I thought about what Simone and I had talked about on the kayak, about flattening the living world into data, about teaching facts without wonder, about the thing my department head had said, and the way I'd been living in my head for years instead of in my life managed, efficient, emotionally organized to the point where the actual feeling had gone thin. I thought, if this thing, whatever it is, whatever framework applies, if it can feel the gap between performance and reality, then it had found a good one in me. And then I thought, it had found a good one in all of us. Because we are all at 30-something more constructed than we started. We'd all come to this lake carrying the careful architectures of adult life, the professional identities, relationship performances, the managed presentations of who we needed to be in our various contexts. We'd all come here because we needed to stop. "Reeve," I said, "what did your grandfather do when the patience lasted longer than usual?" Another pause. Longer. "He talked," Reeve said quietly. "To his brother, to the fire, to the forest. He said he talked honestly. Said things he'd been keeping. Dropped the weight of pretending." Pause. "He said the patience doesn't want performance. It wants the real thing. And the only thing you can offer it is the truth." The tone pulsed again. Closer now, or lower. "Or both." "So we talk," Simone said. "Matter of fact, a decision made. We talk." I confirmed. I will not reproduce everything that was said in that clearing over the next hour and a half. In the dark, with the campfire dead, and the lake still, and the forest silent, and the low frequency vibrating in our bones, some of it belongs to the people who said it, and not to anyone else. What I will say is that we talked honestly, genuinely, uncomplicatedly, honestly, in the way that is very hard, to do in ordinary life and become suddenly possible. When the ordinary rules of social performance are dissolved by something sufficiently larger than social performance, Reeve talked about the trip he'd planned not entirely out of generosity, but also out of fear, that the group was drifting, that the years were creating distance between people he needed close, that he'd orchestrated this weekend partly as a kind of intervention against the entropy that takes friendships when you stop actively resisting it. He talked about the weight of being the one who organizes, the one who holds things together, and how exhausted he was by it, and how he'd never said so. Mara talked about her cooking, not the skill of it, but the anxiety underneath it. The way she performed competence and confidence in the kitchen as armor against the fear that nothing she made would ever be quite good enough. She said she'd built a professional identity around control, because she'd grown up in a home with very little of it, and that the kitchen was the first place she'd ever had power, and that sometimes she cooked for love, and sometimes she cooked to prove something, and she wasn't always certain which was which. Daniel talked about memory, about why he remembered everything. Every detail of every shared experience, cataloging and archiving the lives of the people around him. He said he did it because he was afraid that if he stopped, things would disappear, that people would disappear, that the texture of the life he'd built would become undocumented and therefore fragile. He said that his meticulous memory was less a gift than a symptom of how afraid he was of loss. Simone talked about the composure, the unflappable clinical calm that she wore everywhere, that people praised her for, that she'd cultivated so completely she sometimes couldn't find the boundary between the professional self and the actual one. She said there were things she'd felt in the past year, fear, genuine personal fear, unrelated to patients or crises, that she'd processed with the same detachment she brought to clinical situations, and that she thought she might have done herself some damage in doing so. That composure applied to your own life starts to look a lot like avoidance. And I talked about wonder, about what my student had said and what my department head had said and what I'd been avoiding acknowledging since June, that I had become, somewhere in the course of becoming professional and competent and reliable, genuinely less interested in the living world than I used to be, that I'd been teaching biology as though it were a closed system, finished, documented, measurable, when in fact it was the most gloriously unfinished thing that had ever existed. That I'd lost, not the knowledge, but the love of the knowledge. The specific electric feeling of encountering something alive that you can't fully explain. Like right now, Mara said. Into the silence after I'd finished. Like right now, I agreed. The tone, which had been a constant presence throughout, felt in teeth and sternum, low and patient, and vast shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but perceptibly, the quality of it changed. It's the way the light changes quality in the last moments before sunset, without the sun itself moving noticeably. Something in its character softened. Is it Daniel started? Wait, Reeve said. We waited, and then, not all at once, but in the gradual overlapping way of a natural world resuming, the sounds came back. One cricket, then three. Then a chorus. The frogs, starting with a single voice from the lake's edge, then building in their layered rhythms. A nighthawk calling from high overhead. The water moving against the shore with its quiet percussion. The wind in the pines, a sound like breath, like the forest exhaling. And then, with a soft and sudden warmth that made all of us turn toward it, the campfire. Reignited from the dead coals, the flames coming up orange and steady, as though they'd simply been waiting for permission. We all stared at it for a long moment. 5 faces in the firelight, none of us finding the words. Then Mara said very quietly, I'll be honest. I still have no idea what just happened. Neither do I, Reeve said. Neither do I said, and I'm a biologist. The laughter came slowly, then all at once. The specific, helpless laughter of people who have just survived something they can't name. We laughed until it hurt, and until it turned into something less like laughter and more like release. And the fire burned, and the forest sang itself back into fullness, and the lake lay still and dark and ancient beside us. We stayed up, until nearly 3 in the morning. Not out of fear, the fear had dissolved with the return of the sounds, or transformed into something else, something smaller and more personal. We stayed up because none of us wanted to end the night, because what had happened between 7:30 and midnight had rearranged something in the camp's atmosphere. And in us, and we weren't ready to sleep on it yet. We talked more. Less urgently than before, less confessionally, but with the particular ease that follows honest conversation, the lightness of people who have put down things. They'd been carrying longer than they realized. Mara made hot chocolate with the last of the cocoa powder and condensed milk she'd packed specifically for the last night. And it was almost absurdly delicious. And she accepted our gratitude with a warmth she didn't qualify or deflect for once. At one point, Reeve went to the tree line. Not into the forest, just to the edge of the clearing, where the pines began. He stood there for a minute, facing the dark interior, and none of us asked why. When he came back, he said, "It's gone. Whatever was there. It's gone now. How do you know?" Daniel asked. "The air's different. The forest is just forest again." He sat back down. My grandfather was right. The patience passes. I looked at the tree line. At the old forest in the dark, its trunks just visible at the edge of the firelight. The interior beyond them perfectly naturally black. The crickets singing. The frogs singing. The wind and the pine canopy making its sound of breath and ocean and time, just forest. He was right. You could feel the difference. I thought about the word my student had used. The word that had started the whole unraveling in June, that had led to the conversation with the department head and the slow professional crisis and the need for a lake and 3 days without obligation. The word math. Biology made to feel like math. I sat by the fire and looked at the forest and thought, this is what I've been trying to teach and failing to convey. Not the taxonomy. Not the cycles, not the measurable processes. The fact that the living world is full of things that operate by logics older and larger than our own. That biology is not a closed system. That something can be real and documented and scientifically significant and still exceed the boundaries of our current frameworks. That the proper response to a living system you don't fully understand is not to flatten it into data. It's wonder. It is embarrassingly wonder. We went to bed at 3. We slept until 8. When we woke, the lake was blue-green. In the morning light, and a pair of wood ducks was moving along the far shore, and the air was already warm with the promise of another August day. We broke camp with the same comfortable efficiency as we'd set it up. Packing in the order that made sense, loading the packs and the kayaks and the cooler, leaving the site cleaner than we'd found it. Reeve was the last to leave the clearing. He stood at the fire ring for a moment after the rest of us had shouldered our packs and started for the trail. I looked back. He was looking at the tree line. "Thank you," he said. Not to us. Then he turned and walked toward us. And we went home. The drive back was easy and mostly quiet. All of us in that particular post-experience state where words feel like they'd only diminish what had happened. We stopped for breakfast at a diner in a small town on the highway, biscuits and eggs and sweet tea, and sat in a vinyl booth and talked about ordinary things. And it felt good. It felt very good, the ordinary world, in the particular way it only does when you've been temporarily outside it. What changed after is harder to summarize, because change is rarely cinematic. It doesn't happen in a single declared moment. It's a reorientation, slow and cumulative, of how you move through your life. Reeve started saying the difficult thing in difficult conversations, not all at once, not perfectly, but more than before. He told me, 6 months later over coffee, that he'd stopped trying to hold everything together for everyone, and had started letting people hold things with him. That the difference was smaller than it sounded, and larger than he'd expected. Mara enrolled in a pastry program she'd wanted to do for 4 years, and talked herself out of every time because she already had a career and it felt indulgent. She texted me a photo of her first successful croissant in January with the caption, "I made this for me, not to prove anything." And it still came out good. I put it on my refrigerator. Daniel started a shared memory project, a group document, where all of us contributed things we remembered about our shared history. He called it a collaborative archive. What it was, really, was a way of distributing the weight. Other people remembering, too. He seemed lighter after that. In a way I'd never noticed him being heavy before Simone. And this was the one that made me catch my breath a little when she told me Simone started therapy. Not because she was in crisis, because she'd realized, in a conversation she'd had with herself in the dark on the shore of Lake Hardin, that the composure had been costing something she'd been paying without noticing, that the uncrossed distance between her clinical self and her actual self was a distance she'd been living with for years and didn't have to in me. What changed for me? I went back to school that September and I redesigned my entire biology unit. Not the content. The content was fine. The delivery. I took my students outside. I had them observe things they couldn't yet name and asked them to describe what they were seeing before they categorized it. I asked them what was strange about the living world, what didn't fit, what exceeded their current frameworks. I brought in a guest speaker who was a mycologist, a fungi specialist, and watched my students' faces when she explained that the trees in a forest are in chemical communication through their root systems, that what looks like a collection of individual organisms is in many ways a single networked entity making collective decisions. One of my students, a quiet girl in the third row who rarely spoke, raised her hand and said, "So the forest is thinking." In a manner of speaking, the mycologist said, not the way we think, but processing, communicating, responding, something that functions like thinking. My student looked out the window at the trees visible from the classroom, a look on her face that I recognized instantly, that I had been watching for without knowing it, the specific, open, undefended expression of a mind encountering something it can't fully explain and finding. Is that exciting rather than threatening? Wonder on a 12-year-old's face. In September, in a biology classroom in Tennessee, I had to look away for a moment. Lake Hardin is an ordinary lake. It's on public maps. It has a state-maintained access road. It's been fished and kayaked and camped beside 4 generations. There are other campsites on its shores with fire rings and log seating and families who spend long weekends there without incident. I don't know what happened on the North Shore on a Saturday night in August. I don't have a classification for it. My scientific mind has visited the event many times from many angles, and I have not been able to construct a framework that accommodates all of it, the fire going out, the silence of every living creature simultaneously, the tone in the dark, the circuit of the perimeter, the return of the sounds. I have theories. Infrasound from a geological event causing simultaneous startle response in local fauna. Mass sensory misperception in a group sharing elevated anxiety. The human mind's tendency to find pattern and intention in random environmental events. I can build these arguments. I cannot make myself believe them. What I believe, in the way I believe things now, with less certainty and more honesty than before, is that the world is full of systems we haven't fully mapped. That the living world operates by logics that exceed our frameworks in ways we're only beginning to acknowledge. That there are things in old forests on August nights that move on timescales and by processes that our instruments can't yet measure. And I believe this is the part I couldn't have said before Lake Hardin. The part that my department head's comment about math unlocked and the darkness on the North Shore completed. I believe that the proper response to encountering the unmeasurable is not to reduce it. It's to stand in front of it and let it be large too. Let yourself be small and honest and undefended in the presence of something. Ancient and patient and real in ways you can't document to pay attention. To drop the construction for a moment, the performance of competence and control, and just be a person in the world, which is full of things that will outlast you and predate you and cannot be filed or managed or efficiently processed. The campfire went out, and so did the sounds. And in that silence, in that vast, deliberate, impossible quiet, something looked at us and found us. And what it found when we finally stopped performing was enough. It was enough. I think about that when I'm standing in front of 30 teenagers, trying to teach them what the living world is. I think don't flatten it. Don't make it math. Let it be large and strange and undefended and real. Let them feel the wonder before you name it. The silence taught me that. Whatever was in it, whatever made it, the silence taught me that, and I am grateful. For the dark and the quiet and the thing that moved through it without crossing, for the fire that went out and came back, for the frogs, especially the frogs, the way they returned one voice at a time. Each one, a small act of restoration. The world reassembling itself one sound at a time, out of the great and patient dark end.